For the next hour, you'll be leaving the show me state and entering the show me the money state. So stop what you're doing, grab a pen, and get ready to learn. Jake Floyd of Floyd Financial Group will be your guide for straight talk and honest answers about living the life you deserve in retirement. So prepare to be empowered. Now, here are your Show Me the Money hosts, Jake Floyd and Jeff Shade.
Good morning. Welcome to Show Me the Money with Randy and Jake Floyd, the radio show that gives you the straight talk and honest answers you need to help you reach your wealth management and retirement goals through smart investing and careful planning. My name's Jeff Shade, and as always, I'm just here to ask the questions. But of course, the words of wisdom and solid advice, they come this morning from Jake Floyd of Floyd Financial Group. Hey, Jake, how you doing this morning?
You know, Jeff, I'm living the dream.
We live the dream every week, don't we, on this radio show? Anyway, glad you're doing well, Jake. I hope our listeners are doing well. We've got another great show lined up for us again today. And I want to start off a little bit by talking about something that I saw come across my news headline desk just the other day. And that was, again, more layoffs of tech workers. Now, it's not surprising that tech workers have been laid off, but they're being laid off, Jake, in massive numbers. I understand that there's been some 50,000 layoffs from 200 tech companies since the beginning of 2024. It seems to me that this is just more than the thinning of the herd from COVID. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a little bit hard to say at this point in the game, Jeff. However, yeah, that is a lot of layoffs. But we also saw unprecedented hiring during the pandemic and shortly after, where some of the packages that Google and Microsoft and these guys were competing, the packages they were offering for qualified workers out there were just insane. I had a friend of mine was showing me some of the offers that he was getting from all these different companies. Mm-hmm. He would get an offer, and he was young, you know, like 25, out of college, that kind of thing, couple of years experience, and they were offering him $250,000 a year to start with $150,000 worth of benefits. Even on up from there, even more. And so they were just basically hiring everybody they could possibly get, trying to future-proof themselves a little bit against a hard jobs market. I do still think this is mostly trimming the fat for most of these companies, because when you think about 50,000 layoffs, it is a lot. In the grand scheme of things, it's really not that much when you consider how many people most of these companies employ as a whole. I do think that there are some tailwinds for certain types of companies that are ramping up as some of these other companies may be getting flatter in their growth. Companies like NVIDIA and other tech companies, Supermicro, I think they're going to find it easier to hire talent at maybe less money than they were having to do before. And we're starting to see it in wages, you know, because wages are a factor of competition in the workplace for good employees.
And it seems like that with these tech companies, I mean, you used to be able to get a job in the tech company. You had a job for life, but not anymore. Do you think that these tech layoffs have anything to do with earnings? Because, you know, when you lay off somebody, that savings goes right to the bottom line.
Absolutely, Jeff. I think that during the pandemic, like I said, these guys got pretty bulked up, especially because they didn't have to actually put these people in an office or buy them equipment at the office. That made it so it was easier for them to hire without having to buy buildings to put them in, right? And so now that they're wanting people to come back to the office, I think we're going to see them continue to lay people off, especially if the jobs market as a whole really starts to get a little softer. I think we're going to find that work from home will most likely come to an end outside of just software type jobs.
How do you think artificial intelligence plays into this picture? I've seen articles that say such things as, you know, AI now can program computers, can write this software. Do you think that that has any factor in these layoffs at all?
Yeah, I do think we're starting to see a little bit of that. It's still a little bit early to see the mass layoffs that are probably coming over the next 2 to 4 years as AI becomes more and more prevalent and more trusted. I'm sure most of the people listening to this show have seen an example of where AI has already been going off half-cocked and doing some deviant things and that kind of thing. So I still think it's a little bit early for everybody to start heading for the exit at every job. But I do think that we're going to see a lot more of that, where they're not going to say they lay off people because of AI, but that is ultimately why they're not going to rehire certain positions, is because they can simply do more with less with the help of artificial intelligence in a lot of different fields.
Well, if the productivity of workers in the tech industry does not suffer, does this mean that, you know, we're doing more with fewer people? And does that mean that maybe tech stocks might be something to look at a little more seriously in the future than we've already looked at them?
Yeah, I do think that this whole environment really plays into tech companies' hands because they're also the most likely companies to be able to benefit from artificial intelligence, both with having maybe less employees or eliminating certain types of positions, but they're also in the driver's seat in creating it. There's a lot of people out there saying that, hey, these companies have had a good run. It's time to exit these high growth type companies, the AI companies. And I think that would be a mistake. There's certain companies that we have to just remain invested in and not trade around. There's certain companies that we're not going to liquidate because we don't want to miss the next run up. And these types of stocks and these types of companies are very volatile. NVIDIA, for example, has a long history of going down 75%, followed by a 500 or 600% run upwards. It's a company you really just want to stay invested in. Yes, there's opportunity to trade around it, but if you're not careful, you'll miss the gains. And there's a lot of people that thought NVIDIA was done 2 or 3 years ago, and they've missed the 700-800% since then. So it's important to remember that we're investing, not gambling, and that the goal here is to have a sound retirement. So we can't have only AI companies in our portfolio, but we do need to make sure that we don't just throw them out. Otherwise, we may miss a good portion of the growth in the S&P 500 and NASDAQ looking forward over the next several years.
We're talking with Jake Floyd of Floyd Financial Group. We're talking about current events here. Let's shift gears just a little bit. Jake, I saw something come across my desk that said that banks are in limbo. What do they mean by that?
Yeah, so let's rewind the clock here about a year ago now.
Right.
Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, and First Republic Bank had some issues where there's something called a net unrealized loss that all these banks have a lot on their balance sheet. So a net unrealized loss is basically when the assets on these banks' balance sheets gets devalued, but because they have not exited the position, it has not been realized yet. So in this case, we're talking about mainly bonds. If we have a bond and it's paying 2%, let's say we paid $100 for that bond, and then interest rates rapidly go up and now bonds pay 5%. If you want to exit your bond position, why would anybody pay you that $100 if they can simply go buy a new bond that pays 5%? And the answer is they wouldn't unless you discount your bond to say $70 to make it yield 5%. And so the long and the short is there's a lot of net unrealized loss because interest rates went up so quickly from 0 to 5.25% on the Fed funds rate that the assets underlying these banks, whether it's bonds or other types of instruments, because of these huge losses they have underneath, the longer interest rates stay high, the more likely that is to become a problem. And so I think a lot of people were thinking that interest rates would have started coming back down by now, including these banks. There's a little bit of a race to see whether we're going to lower interest rates fast enough for these banks to be okay, or whether some of these banks, especially the smaller regional banks, are going to have to tap out, so to speak, and yell uncle before we have a chance to get those rates back down so that it's not creating a big problem for them.
So I think along with banks, everybody has their eyes on interest rate cuts for the rest of the year, and I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Let's talk about this weight loss drug stuff. I mean, this is nothing new. Ozempic has been out there. It was primarily a treatment for diabetes. Then people realized they could help you lose weight. And now I understand that these weight loss drugs are now being found to be useful for other things as well.
Ozempic specifically, over the last couple of weeks, has come out that it has other heart benefits and is now able to be prescribed for heart reasons and stroke reasons, as well as the weight loss and diabetic reasons. And so it's going to create a situation where there's going to be a lot of pressure on Medicare and insurance companies to cover this medication. And this medication, in a lot of cases, is $1,000 a month to be on. There's going to be huge tailwinds for these companies that offer these drugs, especially the ones that are getting approved for other types of treatment, because if this stuff gets started to be covered by insurance and Medicare, we may wake up here before too long and find that we have 30, 40, 50% of the population on them.
Right.
I'm not 100% sure that's a good thing, but it's sure going to force a lot of money through some of these pharmaceutical companies in a similar fashion to the way COVID did. Investing around that accordingly is part of what we're already doing, but we're looking at maybe even raising the stakes there a little bit too.
Yeah, well, whatever happened to diet and exercise? I know your dad is all for diet and exercise. He's a trim, fit guy, doesn't use any of this stuff, but I think a lot of people are just looking for the magic pill, the magic bullet, and this Ozempic came along, and they realized it could help with diabetes, but now it helps with weight loss. It helps with all these other things, as you said, heart as well, too. I don't know where we're going to go next with this. I mean, the two things that people in America really want that's very important to them is to be thin, and the other is to have hair. Are we going to find that Ozempic can grow hair on your head pretty soon? I don't know. What do you think about that?
I don't think that that's probably the case. I do think that some of these benefits are also ancillary benefits to the fact that most people are pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetics already, right? So they get on this drug. It fixes the diabetes, which in turn helps them lose weight. Appetite is suppressed, and so they're eating less food, less junk food, which means they have improved heart health, all that kind of thing. Now, again, I'm not a doctor, but it seems to me that all those things go together. I don't think it should be that shocking that there's benefits to losing 100 pounds of extra fat. Again, I do question a little bit, long-term effects of this, and whether people will ever be able to get off of it is another question I have. It's going to be interesting to see where it goes, and there's going to be likely hundreds of billions of dollars trade hands in the meantime.
Yeah, well, I would think this would have a negative effect on the fast food industry because if you're not hungry, used to rolling through a fast food restaurant, I would think that the fast food restaurants are going to be hurting. Speaking of that, I saw this is a couple of weeks ago, but now Wendy's has introduced what they call surge pricing. And I guess it's more expensive to buy fast food when you're hungry at lunch or dinner time than it is the rest of the day. What do you think about that surge pricing and whether or not the other fast food restaurants are going to fall in line with that?
Yeah, so I think in Wendy's case, it's only in a few markets that they're doing it. I don't think that's Wendy's wide, so I just want to be clear on that. But as far as surge pricing in general, I think a lot of people find it to be frustrating. But I would also say that ultimately there's just a limit to what you're willing to pay for something. And I don't know that it necessarily has to be surge pricing that gets you there. Quarter pounder meal at McDonald's with fries and a drink is worth, to some people, $6. Some people are willing to pay $10, maybe some $12. But nobody's going to pay $30. No. Right. I don't know that surge pricing will work the way they want it to, simply because, maybe in an airport or something like that, right, where you have a captive audience with a certain amount of time. But for the most part, I think the surge pricing is going to frustrate people, and it's not something that I would want to do at one of my brands, I guess. Let's put it that way.
No, not at all. Well, I tell you, Jake, we've covered it all here, but also the important stuff, and that's losing weight, getting hair on your head, and surge pricing at fast food restaurants. We're talking with Jake Floyd here at Floyd Financial Group. Glad you could join us this morning for Show Me the Money. If you'd like to get in and sit down with Jake and the crew there at Floyd Financial Group, talk about your individual situation, your journey towards a confident retirement, we are offering a no-cost and no-obligation financial review. All you've got to do to get yours is to call 417-889-7233. Now, you can give that number a call this weekend. Simply leave your name, your telephone number. Ashley will give you a call back during the week and set you up with an appointment to sit down and talk with Jake. Again, no cost, no obligation, and certainly no judgment at Floyd Financial Group. It's just an opportunity for you to sit down on a one-on-one basis and get your questions answered. Once again, that telephone number, 417-889-7233. You can also request your complimentary plan online at FloydFinancialGroup.com. It's FloydFinancialGroup.com. Jake, time for a break. When we come back, we've got more of Show Me the Money right here on 104.1 FM KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
Ready for another helping of some more real money talk? Thought so. Now, here's another serving of Show Me the Money with your hosts, Jake Floyd and Jeff Shea.
Welcome back to Show Me the Money. I'm Jake Floyd, and in this segment, we're going to be talking about costly mistakes that happen as you start to retire.
And I think it's only natural when you do something that you've never done before, Jake, to make a few mistakes. And we're going to try to narrow this down. I'm sure there are probably hundreds of mistakes that people make, but we're going to try to highlight the top ones here. And the first one, and I'm always surprised by this, is that when people retire, for some reason they think, well, I've got to move. I've got to relocate. I don't understand why they think they need to do that.
You know, Jeff, I think that a lot of people probably listening to this show are not of that mindset. So I want to give them that credit first.
We live in such a great place. Why would you want to relocate from a place like this?
Yeah, and as we've heard Randy say a bunch of times, this is the last bastion of sanity, and sometimes we are starting to even question that, but things are somewhat still normal around here. So I do think that there's a lot of people here that are not planning to move. But yes, Retiring and then moving immediately can potentially be a mistake, especially if you move to somewhere that's higher cost of living. You move over there maybe to be with some other kind of family. Just make sure that they're planning to stay there a little bit. I have one client that comes to mind that, they moved a couple of states away to be with their family, and their family moved away a year later. And so they moved their whole existence over there, and then only to have those people move away.
Right.
So
Right.
Now, make no mistake, people are what life's all about, people that you love and being close to them. So, I can totally sympathize with that. I'm just simply saying, make sure that you've really thought it through before you relocate after retirement, because it could come with additional costs that you're not used to having. And just make sure that you're making good decisions as you start to think about those.
Yeah, and being close to family, as you said, I think is very, very important. My daughter's married to a professional athlete, and we thought many times about moving to where they live, but no sooner than we would get there than he would be with another team. So I get what you're talking about there. And people think about moving to Florida. It's a nice place to visit for a short period of time on vacation, but boy, if you live there, it's a whole different story completely. So if you are thinking about relocating, I think the best thing to do would be maybe to go there, rent for a year or so, see if you like it, but don't let go of the house that you've got if you can afford to do that. So if you're thinking about relocating, think twice about that. Next on my list here is downsizing your home.
So again, I think this is one of those ones that could go either way. If you over downsize, if you're used to having a certain amount of space and now you're an empty nester, your kids are grown and so you don't need as much space, just make sure you don't overdo it. Or if you do move, make sure you know where you're moving to, because you may be used to a certain type of neighborhood and that kind of thing. And if you downsize into a smaller home, the neighborhood may be different. Or I do have some people that like to move into, 55 and up communities after they become empty nesters. Now, there's a lot of pluses to that, but you also lose some of the privacy you've probably been used to up to this point, owning your own property. And so you have to carefully weigh whether community is worth giving up a little bit of privacy. Again, for some people, I think it makes total sense, especially people that are single or widowed. Having that extra interaction is very important. When you think about downsizing, especially in today's world, we also have to think about if you have your home paid for currently, then that's great. And you can use the equity in that house to purchase the new house. But if you still owe money, one thing you need to watch out for is you might have a 2.5% mortgage right now, and you go to downsize and you end up with a 7% mortgage.
Right.
And it ends up costing you more for less house. And so honestly, Jeff, this is what I do a lot of here is answer questions like this. And somebody comes in and says, hey, I'm thinking about downsizing. What do you think? Here's the kind of house I have. Here's the kind of house I'm thinking of going to. And I can help weigh in on that. It's not my goal to try to tell people what to do, but it is my goal to try to help offer useful advice and counsel when you're making these big decisions that I see people make every day that you might only make once or twice or 3 times in a lifetime.
Yeah, well, think about this. You may have paid $100,000 for your house and it was 4,000 square feet. So you decided this house is too big for me. I'm going to downsize. Well, now in order to get a 1,500 square foot house from 4,000, instead of 100,000, it may cost you 500,000. From a monetary standpoint, may not be a good idea. Now, your dad did something similar in that when you and Miranda were home, you guys had a pretty good size house with a basement and all that sort of thing. But then Randy now has a smaller house, but it's not too much smaller a house. He seems to be pretty happy in that house.
Yeah, so I think that downsizing can be the right move. I don't want people to misunderstand me here. All I'm saying is we just need to make sure we're considering all the factors when you go to do that so that you don't end up in a worse situation with less space in a neighborhood you don't want to be in right as you're retiring. So just make sure you're really considering everything, especially talk to the bank, talk to whoever you need to figure out what it's going to cost you there. Make sure we're looking at real estate taxes. If you move from outside the city to in the city, that could be a problem. There's a lot of factors to think about.
Yeah, and people say, well, I got 5 bedrooms in my house. I don't want to clean 5 bedrooms or heat and cool those 2. We really only use 2 of them. Well, here's a good idea. Why don't you just close the door on the other 3 and don't go in there? That's a good way to downsize your house. You've lived in this place for all these years. You like the neighborhood. You like your neighbors. You like the church. Everything's close to you. You don't necessarily have to downsize your home. We're talking with Jake Floyd of Floyd Financial Group about costly mistakes that people make at the beginning of retirement. Next one has to do with planning to work into your retirement years. Now, I don't know if necessarily that is a mistake. What do you think about that choice, Jake?
Yeah, so I think the choice itself is fine. However, you may or may not be able to work into your retirement years. So what we need to not do is make it so that you have to do that to make your plan work. because we just simply don't know what a day will bring. You may feel great today. Unfortunately, we don't know what might happen tomorrow. Sometimes people come to me and they say, hey, I don't have a lot saved for retirement, but it's okay because I'm going to work, 40 hours a week until I'm 80. Some people, that's fine, and they can do that. But sometimes we have health challenges that preclude us from being able to do that. So we just need to make sure we're not banking on that in retirement to make ends meet if we can avoid it. Again, we just don't know what a day will bring.
So if you want to work, that's one thing, but if you need to work, that is quite another thing. So consider that. If you're planning on working in retirement, don't plan too hard on that.
Yeah, and I do think, though, Jeff, to this point, that sometimes as people get ready to retire and they have kind of told their boss, hey, in a couple of years I'm going to retire, or when they're financially able to retire, they can kind of look at work a little bit differently, right? Because if if they do something you don't like, you can just, be done that day and tell them to take this job and shove it. That changes sometimes for some people how easy or difficult that job is for them. Sometimes that brings the joy back in the job because, you're not roped in and you don't feel trapped. Sometimes that happens and people work a lot longer than they expect to simply because it's fulfilling and makes them happy and it's not as dreadful as it was when they felt like they had to work there and they were trapped.
Next one on the list here is going to be taking Social Security benefits too early. This is a mistake I think that a lot of people make. It's available to you at 62, so you're going to go ahead and take it.
The biggest issue we get in here is sometimes people don't understand if they take it early that they have to pay it back if they make too much money while they're still working. Based on today's law, basically if you make a little over $22,000 and you have taken Social Security early, you have to pay back $1 for every $2 you earn in wages. So if you're making $60,000 a year, there's a good chance you're going to pay back all of that Social Security, and you will not get the benefit of either getting the income or letting it roll up in deferral. So turning on Social Security early is not necessarily a problem if you are in fact done working, and there are good reasons to file for it early. But if you're still working full-time and you're making good money, if you turn on Social Security, you're just going to end up paying it all back, and that's definitely not what we want to do.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest reason, as you said, is going to be that earnings cap. And also maybe you think, well, I can live on this amount of money. I'll go ahead and take Social Security early. And then before you know it, something happens and you need more money. Well, you've already taken your Social Security early. You can't, in most cases, just start it, stop, and start it again. It is possible to do that, I think. But for the most part, consider very carefully if you're taking Social Security at age 62 because it may not be the right choice for you. I'm going to try to squeeze in one more here, Jake, before the break, and that is going to be carrying debt. Boy, I tell you, DEBT, that is a four-letter word as far as I'm concerned when you're getting into retirement.
It's a good idea to have as much debt paid off as you can before you get into retirement. Now, I will say the exception to that for some people is if you have a very low mortgage rate and you still have a mortgage, that's not necessarily a problem. But when we get into retirement, everything becomes about cash flow, not about as much income as we can make, right? Because if we can control the outgo, i.e. like a mortgage or car payments or credit card debt, then we just simply don't have to make as much money in retirement to make it feel the same as it does while you're working. And if we're not making as much and we're not spending as much, you're also paying less in taxes. So having that debt paid off is usually the best way to go. But sometimes having a mortgage is okay. Especially if you have a very low interest rate, 2.5%, 3%, it's hard to want to pay that off in today's environment where, you can stick that money in the bank even and make 5%. But in general, paying off debt before retirement is a good idea.
Yeah, and there's good debt and there's bad debt, and you alluded to that maybe a mortgage is good debt because it may be at a very low percentage rate, but also, the house usually does appreciate in value where bad debt can be things like credit cards. And these days, I'm surprised still the average credit card interest rate is like in the middle 20s or something like that. Car loans are a lot better than that, but boy, they're really getting you on these credit cards. So if you do use your credit cards, go ahead and pay it off at the end of each month. But also, I think if you're getting into retirement, try to go down and just eliminate all of the bad debt, but I think a mortgage could be okay. We're talking with Jake Floyd here, Floyd Financial Group, and we're talking about some mistakes that people often make going into retirement. If you've got questions about our program today, you've got comments, certainly we would love to hear from you. You can phone those questions and comments into 417-889-7233, 417-889-7233. Also, use that same number if you'd like to get in and sit down with Jake and talk about your journey towards a confident retirement. We're offering an opportunity for you to do just that with no cost, no obligation, and no judgment whatsoever. Take advantage of this opportunity this weekend by dialing 417-889-7233 and requesting your no-cost, no-obligation, no-judgment financial review. Again, you can call it this weekend. Leave your name, your telephone number. Ashley will give you a call back on Monday and set you up with an appointment with Jake to have that conversation. Again, it's not going to cost you a dime. Why wouldn't you make this call? 417-889-7233. You can also request your Floyd Financial Group financial review online at floydfinancialgroup.com. It's floydfinancialgroup.com. Time for a break, Jake. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation about mistakes that people make going into retirement when our show continues right here on 104.1 KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
We're back with your financial catch of the day, and it's a big one. Here's more Show Me the Money Radio with your hosts, Jake Floyd and Jeff Shea.
Welcome back to Show Me the Money. I'm Jake Floyd, and in this segment, we're going to continue talking about costly mistakes people make as they get ready to retire.
And Jake, I don't know if this is a mistake or not. I want to get your take on this, but this mistake has to do with not using home equity as an income source. Is that a mistake to not use home equity? What do you think about that?
Taking a mortgage out simply to make ends meet, a normal traditional mortgage, is probably not a good idea. However, there are people that could benefit from a reverse mortgage. In most cases, using the home equity to make ends meet is really not the way to go. However, if you have a mortgage payment, especially a pretty large mortgage payment, and paying off your house would enable you to retire, you could use a reverse mortgage to pay your house off in a manner where you don't have to make those payments anymore. And for some people, that can be a good tool. And so there are reasons to use home equity to help retire, but it's not quite what it seems on face value.
Have you had people who have come to you and ask you about reverse mortgages, Jake?
I do occasionally have people ask me about them. Honestly, I bring them up to, again, a very certain type of person. They don't maybe have a whole lot saved, but if they got their house paid off, they would be able to retire. And so there are some good reasons to use them. I would say probably 15 or 20% of people are a good candidate for a reverse mortgage. It's certainly not everybody, but it's something that we'll talk about if you come in for your consultation, and we can say, hey, does this make sense to pay this off with a reverse mortgage or to supplement income with a reverse mortgage? And sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't, but that's what we're here for counsel.
And in order to qualify for a reverse mortgage, I think you got to be at least 62, and you've got to have a certain amount of equity in your house, and certainly you have to be in a situation where you do not want to pass that house on to heirs, but a reverse mortgage might be right for you, and it's something for you to think about. The next one, which is possibly a mistake, is not planning for long-term care. I think we can say that is a big mistake. It's not possibly.
Yeah, the cost of long-term care is sneaking up on people where, 10 years ago, in the last bastion of sanity here, you could get full-blown skilled nursing care for $100 a day, $110 a day. Now it's approaching $300 a day.
Yeah, sure.
And so I think people are a little bit in denial as far as how much money that's going to cost in retirement, especially for a couple with an average stay of 30 months or so, depending on who we're talking about. And what type of reason you have for being there. If you're Alzheimer's, it could be longer than that. But if we have a couple, it's very likely you're going to spend a couple $250,000 just to get started on long-term care and retirement. There's going to be people that spend millions before it's over. And so I think it's an important topic of conversation to at least have an idea of what asset you're going to use to pay for that care. And if you don't like that idea, what can we do to get around that? And there's obviously traditional long-term care insurance, but there's also some different asset-based long-term care solutions that we can talk about. Again, there's basically several ways to pay for long-term care, and which one may be right for you is going to depend on age and circumstances, income, and assets as well. And that's something that we talk about pretty frequently.
And I've heard people say, well, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. I think that's a big mistake, is not planning for long-term care well in advance. Do you have people who come in and say, well, now I'm 75. I think I want to find a way to pay for long-term care. It usually doesn't work out if you wait until that age in order to do it, right?
Yeah, so you definitely have less options at 75 than you do at 55, but a lot of it really revolves around your health, meaning if you're already having trouble, it's too late to start on a lot of different remedies for that cost problem. Not everything. There's always something we can do. If you have a situation where you have a spouse that's headed into a nursing home like right now, There are planning techniques that we can utilize to help get that stuff paid for. Again, it's way too broad a conversation to have here on the radio because there's a million different situations that people can be in, but it is something that we do here. We have a branch of our business called Elder Care Advisors, but basically that's all they do is try to help people figure out the best way to pay for care. So again, if you're in a crisis situation, meaning like you have somebody in there right now, give us a call. We can get you in relatively quickly and we can talk about how to pay for that. However, if it's still planning in advance, there are several different ways to handle it. And so having a conversation around that can make sense as well.
And if you're concerned about losing the family farm, it is best to have that conversation well in advance, too, because you just can't make these plans, a month or two before going into a nursing home. There is a look-back period. Typically, it's about 5 years or so. So, again, you got questions about long-term care and paying for that. 417-889-7233 is our number. 417-889-7233. Talking about mistakes that people often make before going into retirement. The next one is a lack of estate planning documents. I don't need these darn papers.
Yeah, I've definitely heard that before. And, people are often astonished what they can't do with their spouse's income or assets without a court order in some cases if they do not have a power of attorney and that spouse becomes incompetent. It's very important to have at least a financial power of attorney just to make sure you can move things around if you need to use income to pay for care and things like that. But looking at a trust makes sense for a lot of people as well because a trust allows you to spell out exactly the way you want things to go and can really take the burden off of your beneficiaries in a lot of ways by setting that all out ahead of time. And so my wife, Elizabeth, operates a law firm here in the office, and that's what she does. She does estate planning and trusts, wills, powers of attorney, that kind of thing. And so she does free consultations as well. So if that's something you're interested in, we do that here as well. But it is definitely a good idea to have some sort of an estate plan. It'll make it a lot easier on your beneficiaries if they're not having to go through probate and all kinds of things like that. My dad always likes to say that probate is like filing a lawsuit against your kids.
Right.
And most people don't want to do that to their kids.
And the next one I want to talk about, Jake, insofar as mistakes people make going into retirement, is not revising your investment strategy.
Yeah, so I think this is a really big one where people, especially people that have been very aggressive throughout their career of saving money and earning money through more aggressive type investments, a lot of them think that will continue to work as they start to spend money out of their portfolio. And some of them find out that that is not necessarily the best thing to do. And so I think as you approach retirement, it's more important to have some safety in place because when you start spending money out of your portfolio, it's much more difficult to get back to even if markets throw us a curveball. Reevaluating where you're at, what's important to you, how much income you're taking, all those things should affect your investment strategy and your overall risk tolerance and really what kind of investment classes are appropriate. Definitely as you get close to retirement, maybe within a couple of years of retirement, you should be thinking about how you're going to shift things around to make sure that they're there for you and that we're not subject to some 2008 Black Swan event or something that makes us have to go back to work at 80 years old.
Jake, when people get into retirement, they think, well, boy, I don't want to lose what I've got. I've got to be ultra conservative. I've got to err on the side of safety. Is that a mistake to be too conservative with your investments, do you think?
So right now, it feels pretty good to be a conservative investor, right? Because interest rates are high. However, people have often very short memories that 18 months ago, interest rates were zero and were for the preceding 13 years. It's easy to forget that CDs were paying 0.1% for 12, 13 years prior to this rate increase. And so it is absolutely possible to be too conservative. In this environment, maybe not, but I do think that interest rates will be coming back down relatively soon. And so we do need to have a plan for how to lock in those interest rates while they're high, or at least what we're going to do if interest rates go back to zero and to where we're not earning anything. How are we going to replace that money that you're spending in retirement to avoid spending your money down to zero?
So you don't want to be too conservative with your investments, but then conversely too, Jake, I think that you don't want to be too risky with your investments. Right,
and that kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the investment strategy, right? A lot of people are very aggressive while they're saving money, which is not wrong. That's fine. That's a good thing. Assuming you can handle the swings, you're just most likely going to make more money that way, generally speaking. But Once we get to retirement, that's actually not the case. So let's think about for a minute. There's a 4% rule, right? It refers to how much money is it safe to take out without risking running out of money. And generally speaking, a lot of people would say that 4% is the number that you should be focused on. Now, I would say that that's a little too general an assumption. However, if we have some safety in place, we might even be able to push that to 5%. So let's say we're taking 5%. Say you have, just to make the math easy, make it a round number. Let's say you have $1 million and you're withdrawing $50,000 a year off of that. If we have a 2008 scenario and you're very risky invested, right? You have too much risk in the portfolio. In 2007, 8, and 9, the market was down 53%. Okay, so let's say your million now becomes, again, to make the math easy, 500,000 while you're spending money out. Well, you don't want to adjust your lifestyle based on what the market is doing, so you continue to take $50,000 out. Now you're withdrawing 10% from the portfolio, which is completely and totally unsustainable. So that's really the problem you have to avoid is while we're in deferral, while we're waiting to retire, we can afford to take quite a bit of risk. But even if you have a high risk tolerance, you may not have a high risk capacity in retirement, depending on how much money you have saved. So even if you can stomach the risk, your portfolio may not be able to handle it based on how much money you have saved versus how much you want to take out. As we're thinking about that, it is 100% possible to be too conservative, but it's also possible to be too risky. We need balance in retirement, balance when we're taking income.
Jake, another mistake I think people make going into retirement is putting all of their eggs into one basket. What I mean by that is not being diversified. They maybe have one stock in their portfolio and it's their employer stock. Why is that an issue?
This kind of goes with the last one where we're being too risky with investments. Putting your eggs in one basket is potentially a problem, but it's also from a strategy perspective. No one investment gives you all the things you need in retirement. We talked a little bit about this last week. At the very least, we need 3 things from our money and from our retirement plan, which is we need growth, we need a certain amount of safety, and we need a certain amount of liquidity. The problem with that is there's no one investment that does all 3 of those things well. And so we need probably at least a couple of different buckets of money in order to make sure we check the boxes, we get enough liquidity and enough safety, but otherwise focus on growing the money. And so having simply one stock for sure, but maybe even if we just have stocks and nothing else, it doesn't round us out enough to give us a really high probability of succeeding in retirement.
Well, Jake, I think based on our conversation here about mistakes that people may be making getting into retirement, I think our listeners may have some questions. Maybe an opportunity for you to sit down and talk about their individual concerns would be in order. If you're one of those people, we've got some good news for you because right now you can call 417-889-7233 and request your no cost, no obligation, no judgment Floyd Financial Group Retirement Review. As I said, it's not going to cost you a dime. It's a no-tie zone at Floyd Financial Group, just a friendly conversation between you and Randy or Jake to put you on a path towards a confident retirement. Go ahead, ask those questions. Get the individual answers that you need in order for you to make the best decision with your retirement. Once again, it's not going to cost you a dime. 417-889-7233. You can go ahead and give that number a call this weekend if you want. Ashley will give you a call back during the week, this coming week, and set up an appointment that is convenient for you. Once again, 417-889-7233. Why don't you make that call this weekend? This one call really could make all the difference. You can also request your complimentary plan online at FloydFinancialGroup.com. That's FloydFinancialGroup.com. Jake, time for a break. We'll come back and put a bow on our topic here, retirement mistakes that people make before getting into retirement, when our show continues here on 104.1 FM KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
People of the Ozarks, step away from the fishing pole and prepare to be shown the money, because we're back with more straight talk and honest answers with Jake Floyd and Jeff Shea.
Welcome back to Show Me the Money. I'm Jake Floyd. In this last segment, we're going to finish our topic of conversation around costly mistakes that people make sometimes as they enter in retirement.
And Jake, I think one of the big ones is confusion about how much money to withdraw. People see, well, 4% should make it, but in reality, it's a lot more complex than just 4%.
It 100% is more complex than that. If you have a really high risk portfolio, 4% may be too much, because it comes back to, like I said in the last segment, once you start withdrawing money out of your portfolio, things change. It changes the equation in a way that you really need to be aware of how much risk you're taking so that anytime you do have a drawdown, that you're able to get back to even. There are situations where people can withdraw 6%. 5% is a number that I usually like to shoot for, depending on how much risk we have in the portfolio. But 4%, 5%, 6%, I can tell you that basically 10% is never suitable, right? Right. So sometimes people come in, they say, I make $150,000 a year. I got this $500,000 to retire on. You think I can withdraw $80,000 or $90,000 a year off here? And I'm like, no, we can't, at least not sustainably. Now, again, some people are not worried about leaving an inheritance, right? So we can push those numbers a little bit, knowing we're going to do what we call a controlled spend down. Not everybody is just dying to leave $1 million to their kids. Maybe they want to just enjoy the money while they're here. However, I have the opposite too, where people want to shop at Goodwill and live on water and bread, so that they can leave as much money as possible to their kids. And there's nothing wrong with either of those situations, right? It's a function of, what's important to you and how important it is to leave an inheritance to your beneficiaries and how much. So those are all conversations we have in our initial consultation because we want to make sure we understand you and what makes you tick, not what makes somebody else feel good about things, because it's your money and your retirement.
I've heard these sayings, I hate annuities. It's in popular culture all over the place. And I think a big mistake that sometimes people can make, especially going into retirement, is ignoring annuities and paying attention to, the noise that's out there. So why is it a mistake, do you think, to ignore completely annuities?
So annuities are a good way to add safety to a portfolio. They're also a good way potentially to add income in retirement. I've had people that really like annuities. I have people that have negative connotations already about annuities based on a past experience. I've had people come in saying, I will never ever buy an annuity, and they have a $3,000 a month pension from the previous employment, right?
Right.
So that pension is paid with an annuity. A pension is funded with an annuity. So there's a lot of different types of annuities. Most of the time it's a variable annuity or immediate annuity that you can't change, that people don't really like. Distinguishing between the different types of annuities is important because they're certainly not all the same. And even within the same type of annuity, for example, like a fixed indexed annuity, there's so many different variations that you can't lump them all together. One is not equal to the other. And so while I agree, generally speaking, that most annuities are not good and you can't make enough money on them, there are exceptions to that, and we do use annuities in the office here in situations where people need safety but also need to grow the money. Sometimes those can make sense, and so we don't try to fit the square peg in the round hole, right? If it doesn't make sense, we're not going to cram annuities down your throat. But sometimes they do make sense, and so ignoring them completely can be a mistake because especially like in the last 15 years when interest rates for the most part were zero, they were a good way to get some return on safe money versus just simply stuffing it in your mattress or at the bank, which is basically the same thing at 0.1% interest.
Jake, I've got people in my family who are rather elderly, and sometimes they'll ask me questions about things that they've heard or people have contacted them that obviously, to me, seems to be a scam. That's another mistake I think that people make, is wanting to believe that they can make X amount of money on this investment or just falling for general scams. That's a big mistake, and unfortunately, scams are rather prevalent out there.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of people today that are getting scammed on cryptocurrency, getting an email from their kid that says, hey, I need money. Right. I mean, all kinds of different scams. And the more technologically advanced things become, I mean, this is honestly one of my big concerns about artificial intelligence is the scams will be indistinguishable from reality. And it'll be a difficult thing to deal with for law enforcement that these scams are not just everywhere, but it'll make people more diligent to the point where they're just, going to have a hard time trusting anything that's on their email or on their phone. Scams are a big deal. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. I do have clients that email me or call me and say, hey, I got this email. You think this is a scam or not? And so we try to help with that where we can. There's definitely a lot of scammers out there.
And artificial intelligence, I think, has just aided these scammers a great deal. Like you said, these days they can even sample a person's voice. Let's say that it's a grandchild's voice. Somehow they'll get a hold of this voice, and then they'll make a phone call, and the AI thing will say, please send money, and I'm going to put a guy on the line that's going to take it because I've gotten into some trouble. I mean, this is really a very difficult landscape, especially for older people. But generally, I think you should pretty much doubt everything, so don't fall for those scams.
Yeah, Jeff, I think also a good rule of thumb is if somebody sounds panicked on the phone or they threaten to call the police on you or the IRS or whatever, if there's a time element and they don't want to hang up the phone for any reason, a lot of times that can be a red flag for a scam because their whole goal is to keep you on there until they get your money. And so they may say, hey, the IRS is going to come by your house tomorrow and take your car and all kinds of things. Number one, that's not how the IRS operates. The IRS will send you a letter. The IRS is not going to call. They're not going to show up at your doorstep. Just realize that if there's an element of panic to that, whether it's somebody pretending to be a granddaughter or whether it's supposedly somebody going to call the police about some bill that you had 20 years ago or whatever, those are usually scams. So just, if somebody's panicked or crazy, that's usually a scam, and they're just trying to induce you into a panic into giving your money away.
And Jake, another mistake I think people make is understanding how long they're going to live. I mean, with modern technology and medicine and just knowledge and so forth, people are living longer than ever before. So underestimating your lifespan, that could be a very big mistake.
Absolutely. I hear that a lot from clients where they retire at 65, and they think they're going to die at 75, right? So we only have to have 10 years of income. Well, what happens if you live to 95 and you need 30 years of income, right? And so that's mostly my job here is to make sure you make good money and we make sure that we're accounting for things like you living longer than you expect so that you don't get there and run out of money. And so I'm always going to set up a plan that's designed to last 25, 30, 35 years for people because I don't want to assume that you're not going to live that long. And if that happens, it happens. But at the same time, we need to make sure we have a good plan that's going to last as long as you do.
We're talking about costly mistakes that people make at the beginning of retirement with Jake Floyd at Floyd Financial Group. Again, our telephone number 417-889-7233. The next one, Jake, is not planning for the death of a spouse.
Yeah, so this is a big one. This is one that people don't like to think about, and I don't blame them. I can't imagine losing my spouse. But at the same time, when it comes to retirement and it comes to getting older in life, the only two things that are certain, it's been said, are death and taxes. And so as you get to be 70, 75 years old, this is a very likely thing that can happen to people. And if you have not planned for it, loss of Social Security income, pension income, other types of income, we need to have a plan for how we're going to deal with that. If one spouse predeceases the other, we don't want to leave our spouse in the poorhouse once you're gone because we failed to plan for that. So that's always something we're thinking about when we set up plans is, okay, how can we set up? A lot of times it's the husband setting up the wife, but sometimes it's the opposite, but making sure that the higher earner of the two, when they're gone, doesn't leave their spouse in a bad position. So that's something I'm always thinking about when we design plans.
And our final mistake that I want to talk about, Jake, is a pretty common one, and that is not being frugal. It's so easy to spend money when you're young. You don't have to worry about saving because you got a paycheck. But not being frugal when you're in retirement, boy, that can have some bad consequences.
This is not something I think a lot of our listeners are probably going to have a problem with. I mean, there's probably a few. But by and large, people listening to this show, I think, are frugal, and they're conservative, good, red-blooded Americans. And so I think a lot of them are... I have, honestly, more problem with people not being able to spend their money, because they've been saving it for so long. They have a hard time flipping the switch. They've been storing up the acorns and storing up the acorns. Well, we store those acorns up for a reason so that you can take them out at some point. Let me put it this way. The not being frugal part of this is the concern here, obviously, is running out of money because we spent too much money. If you're concerned about running out of money, you probably won't, right? And so I have people that are like, I really don't want to run out of money. Most of the people that say that to me, there's a chance that rounds down to zero that they're going to run out of money simply because they're not spending very much and they've managed to save a pretty good penny. The people that I worry about are the people that make a lot of money, they've saved some, but they don't seem to have any concern about taking it out, 15,000 here, 20,000 there. It's those people that I'm more worried about. So if you're concerned about it, take a breath and realize that that probably is going to help you not run out of money. So just the fact that you're concerned about it is going to dictate life habits that are probably going to keep you from running out of money. But yes, we do need to continue to be frugal in retirement. We don't need to be too frugal, though. That's another mistake that's not on this list. But some people fail to enjoy retirement because they're so worried about running out of money. But that's what I'm here for. When I start designing plans, I need to make sure that you get some money off of there, and I encourage people to take some money out. But we don't want to take out so much that it jeopardizes things. Being frugal is a good thing.
We're talking with Jake Floyd of Floyd Financial Group here, and we've been talking about mistakes that people often make going into retirement. If you've listened to the program today and you're thinking to yourself, boy, I am guilty of some of those mistakes, or I'm not sure if I'm making mistakes, once again, we invite you to stop in and have a conversation with Randy or Jake there at Floyd Financial Group. It's quite simple. Call 417-889-7233 and ask for your complimentary, no-cost, no-obligation, no judgment Floyd Financial Group Retirement Review. That's right, it's not going to cost you a dime, but this one call could make all the difference in your retirement journey. 417-889-7233 is that number to call. You can call it this weekend. Leave your name, your telephone number. Ashley will give you a call back on Monday or Tuesday. Set up a conversation so that you can sit down and have this very friendly conversation. Again, 417-889-7233. What are you waiting for? Make that call this weekend. You can also request your plan online at FloydFinancialGroup.com. It's FloydFinancialGroup.com. Well, Jake, I always enjoy our time in the radio each and every Saturday morning, but inevitably, it does come to an end. So for Jake Floyd, I'm Jeff Shade. Have yourselves a great weekend, won't you? And be sure to join us again next week for another edition of Show Me the Money right here on 104.1 FM KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
The information provided in the preceding program is for educational purposes only and are not intended as investment advice for any individual or entity. All information contained herein believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representations as to its completeness or accuracy. The opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not constitute financial, legal, or tax advice. Please consult your financial professional before executing any financial strategy. Financial planning offered through Floyd Financial Group, LLC, an investment advisor registered in the state of Missouri.